We all know that ulterior motives aren't necessarily a bad thing. You know, that kids, when we were kids, we didn't always tidy our rooms. And then parents would say, if you tidy your room, I'll give you a treat. And then as we get older, we learn that we want to tidy our rooms. You want to live in a tidy environment, not because you're going to get a treat, but because it's important to live in an organized, tidy environment. The Talmud in Masechet Nazir puts this idea of ulterior motives and good motives beautifully with the following phrase. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, La'olam ya'asok hatam b'torah v'mitzvot, afilu shelo lishman, she mitoch shelo lishman ba lishman. Rav Yehuda taught in the name of Rav, saying that we should always involve ourselves in Torah and mitzvot, even if I'm doing Torah and mitzvot for ulterior motives, because through doing things for ulterior motives, I will eventually come to do the same thing for the right reasons. That's why when kids go to shul, we give them sweets and candies in the hope that they'll come at the beginning for the sweets, but then afterwards the music and the tefillah of shul will bring them into shul as an older person. Who do we learn this idea from? Who is the paradigm of ulterior motives moving to pure motives? The paradigm is from this week's parasha, Parashat Balak. We're told, B'schar membet korbanot sheikriv Balak harasha zacha v'yatza mimenu Ruth. The Gemara tells us that because of, in merit of, the 42 sacrifices that Balak, the king of Moab, sacrificed in this week's parasha, he sacrificed these korbanot in order to try to bring God onto his side, in order that Bilam could then curse the Jewish people. Because of those 42 sacrifices that Balak offered up to God in this week's parasha, he merited that his granddaughter, his great-granddaughter, was Ruth HaMoaviyah, and then from Ruth comes David HaMelech and the Moshiach. They all descend from Balak HaRasha, and it all starts with this ulterior motives in offering a sacrifice in this week's parasha. How does that work? Is that true? With Balak, surely we would say that he had no interest in getting closer to God. How is this a good model of ulterior motives moving to pure motives? So let me share with you a story. I'll tell you a story that happened quite recently, within the last year. And it's based on the story you will see connects very much to a Shem Mishmor that we will learn. I have a student who grew up in New York. He wasn't a religious Jew, and he grew up in New York, and he decided at a very young age, at 14, 15 years old, decided he wants to be a Navy SEAL. Now, I know very little about the American Army, but I know that it's very difficult to become a Navy SEAL, and that's what he wanted to do, and he spent hours a day training and running and swimming and involving himself physically in order to be ready for this. He finished college, he went to an Ivy League college, and he was in all the sports teams, and he throughout college was exercising and running and preparing himself to become a Navy SEAL. If you were to bump into this chap on the street, you wouldn't want to have an argument with him. Last summer, a year ago, Tzuk Eitan, you know, it was a difficult chapter here in Israel. The war, the rockets were coming from Gaza and hitting civilian populations here in Israel. And he watched the news in New York, and he realized that my place isn't in the American army, but he wants to join the Israeli army. He came to Israel, spent some time learning in yeshiva, and now he'll be joining the army, please God, here shortly. His original plan was always to serve in the American army. If you would ask him as a 15-year-old, what's your plan? Navy SEAL. As an 18-year-old, Navy SEAL. What's your plan as a 20-year-old? Navy SEAL. That was always his plan. Why am I pushing myself so hard? Because that's where I want to go. But then at the last minute there was a switch. And instead of going to this army, he ended up going to another army. Rabot machashavot belev ish va'atzat Hashem hitakum. That we have big plans, we exercise, we do activities to bring us in one direction, but then in the last minute we end up that same activity brings us in an opposite direction. Balak offered up sacrifices to God, and he brought up sincere sacrifices to God. And those sacrifices he was hoping would appease God in order that then Bilam would be able to curse the Jewish people. Well, he offered up the sacrifices and they did appease God. But instead of bringing curse to the Jewish people, they brought us Ruth HaMoaviyah. Rabot machav shavot belevish, we have many plans. Va'atzat Hashem, but God's plan, hitakum. That's what's going to last. So my blessing for all of us, this week's parasha, that even though we think that we're doing things in order to achieve goal A, even though I might be tidying my room because I'm going to get the reward, even though I might think I'm going to shul in order to get the sweet, even if I'm training to become a Navy SEAL, even if I'm offering up sacrifices in order to be able to curse the Jewish people, Atzat Hashem hitakum. Sometimes it switches around, and all of that effort, rather than going in a negative direction or somewhere where it will be less helpful, we find all that energy and all of that investment switching round and going to a much more positive, powerful place, ultimately bringing from Balak, the king of Moab, to Ruth HaMoaviyah, to David HaMelech, and ultimately very soon to Moshiach Tidkeinu too. Shabbat Shalom Uvorach.